Hi, I'm Gary Katz. I want to thank all the folks who bought copies of my DVD programs over the last 20 years. If it wasn't for their support and the support of companies like Windsor One and Stabila, I never would have been able to produce what turned out to be a 10-program series on mastering Finish carpentry. Those 12 to 20-year-old videos look pretty terrible compared to streaming video today. And that's why I'm no longer selling the DVDs. But the carpentry techniques haven't aged much at all. And that's why I'm making them available here for free. Enjoy. Once the casing's installed, it's time to install the baseboard. As I said in programs 1 and 2, I always make a cut list for baseboard. Otherwise, I'll make too many trips to the saw. I like to measure one room at a time. Anything more than that, and the cut list just gets too long, and I get confused. Besides, I make mistakes just like everyone does. If I do one room at a time, I can pick up the mistakes from the room I'm in while I'm cutting the next room and save a trip to the saw. In the last program, I didn't cover the finer points of making a cut list, or about coping inside corners. Here's a typical inside corner with a cope cut. I want to hit those subjects now, but first, let's look at the basics of baseboard. After all, the joinery in baseboard forms the foundation for much of the joinery in trim carpentry. Take a look at this mitered corner. Notice how the long point of the miter back here is at the back of the molding and against the wall. Inside corners are always like that. The long point is always against the wall for an inside corner. Outside corners are exactly the opposite. The short point of the miter is always at the back of the molding, right here, and it's always against the wall. That fact is fundamental to trim carpentry, but lots of us never see it. Make sure you do. Recognizing inside and outside corners by the location of the long point and the short point of a miter makes the job a lot easier. And it's much easier to teach an apprentice too, especially when you're showing them how to use a miter saw. Look at this. When you're standing at your saw and you're cutting on the flat because the molding's too big to cut standing up, with the back of the molding lying flat, the long point is always against the base of the saw for an inside corner, just like it is on the wall. And for an outside corner, the short point is always against the base of the saw, just like it is on the wall. Not only that, but the top of the molding is against the fence. Then the left-hand joint is on the left side of the blade, and the right-hand joint is on the right side of the blade. Once you understand and see miters as long points and short points, you'll never have to visualize the direction of a miter again, and you'll be able to rely 100% on a cut list rather than your memory. The cut list I make is pretty much the same, whether I'm mitering or coping the inside corners. Let me show you. I always miter MDF moldings rather than cope the inside corners, because I've found that the skin on MDF compresses sometimes, which can crack the paint around a sharply back-cut cope. So if I were mitering this inside corner, I'd make a V mark on the right side for an inside corner, and an OC on the left for this outside corner. But if I were coping the inside corners, I'd write a C on the right side. I prefer to cope the right end because I'm right-handed. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So if I'm coping the right-hand end of this little short piece, then this longer piece would have a butt cut right here. So I'd mark a B for a butt cut on this end. And on this end, I'd make a C for a cope. And all I have to do is measure that piece. I started at this corner here because I wanted to cover baseboard basics, inside and outside corners. But when I'm coping baseboard on a job site, I never move to my right. I always move to my left. That's because I try to cope just the right-hand ends. That's also the direction I move while I'm installing the material, but I'll get to that later. Let's take a closer look at measuring now. No matter which joint you're using, experienced carpenters know that you can't just measure each piece precisely. There's a good bit of intuitive judgment involved in measuring moldings. For instance, when you're mitering inside corners, always install short pieces first, like this one. When I'm mitering, I always cut short pieces a little short, about 1/16 of an inch or so they'll fit in without having to use a hammer. However, if you're coping a piece like this, then cut it just the right length and press fit it to fit after the butt end of this piece is already in place. Like I said before, installing baseboard involves all the fundamentals of finished carpentry, including thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead. Let's look at a longer piece next. For pieces like this, and for anything from about 1 foot to 8 feet long, I measure precisely and cut exactly to that measurement, so the piece will fit perfectly. For long pieces like this one, and for anything over 8 feet or so, I usually add about 1/8 of an inch so I can spring the piece into the wall. At the same time, remember, when you're butting baseboard up against casing, like this piece, never measure it too tight, or the baseboard will push the casing and maybe move the jamb right into the door. Learning to read a tape measure when it's bent into a corner like this is also one of those experience things. But if you can't seem to pick the technique up, stop struggling and try this trick I learned from the guys on the JLC Finish Carpentry Forum. Cut a piece of baseboard exactly 4 inches long. Put that piece into the corner and mark the back side of it. Then measure from the other end. Here is the casing over there. Right to that line, then just add 4 inches to that measurement. You can make this short piece 10 inches or 3 inches or 5 inches, whatever number you're most comfortable adding in your head. Now listen, if you're butting your tape measure into a corner like this, be sure the end of your tape measure is off the floor and up on the wall where the baseboard's going to sit. Not down in here, but up in here, so it doesn't fall into a hole the drywallers might have left. And if there is a hole like this one down here, fill it with a drywall screw. Drive the screw in until the head's flush with the wall above. Let me show you. That's a trick I learned from Kevin Coyner. If you don't put some backing in there, and you leave a hole like that behind the molding, the baseboard will get kicked in by the carpet guys, and the miters will open up. Or, even if you cope the molding, the base might end up looking a little crooked. Also, make sure while you're measuring that you don't have any humps on the wall. I take a square like this and scrape the wall a little bit just to make sure there's no big bumps on there. You know, if you have an apprentice standing around on the first day of the job, all this corner preparation, as well as sweeping the floor all the way around the room, it's a perfect chore to keep them out of your hair. Now let's review cutting baseboard for just a moment. In the last program, I covered cutting baseboard on a miter saw pretty thoroughly, but there wasn't time to cover every technique. And for this molding, which has to be cut on the flat because it's too tall to cut standing up in the saw, maintaining production and quality is all about technique. First, I'll take the fences off this saw. Bosch made this pretty easy because the fences can pull right off. It's the only saw that allows you to lift the fences instead of sliding them off the saw. And I'd rather be able to remove them like this than have to take off my little wooden accessory fence from every fence before I make a bevel cut. I can save a lot of time too if I keep the saw beveling as much as possible to the left. When I'm cutting baseboard, it's pretty easy to do. For that piece that goes on the face of the pilaster right over there, it has an outside corner on both ends. So I'm going to make the first cut with the molding upside down. Then I turn the material over. Because it's baseboard, I don't have to make all my measurement marks at the top. I can measure and cut to a mark down here at the bottom. So I line the short point up of this base here with the saw guard, and I hook my tape measure and make my measurement mark. Now I slide the measurement mark pretty close to the far side of the saw guard here, and that way I won't be cutting too short of the mark. The first thing I do is I bring the saw down a couple of times, at least once, just to make sure it's in the right position on the material. And then I hold the saw right there and creep the material up to the blade. Pretty simple. You know, if you think one step ahead while cutting baseboard on the flat, you can pretty much leave your saw right where it is, beveling to the left. Now let's make a cope cut for the right side of that opposite pilaster. To make a cope cut, I cut a normal inside corner first. See, this is an inside corner because the long point is against the saw table. Now, let's go over to my work table and cut the cope. You can use a coping saw or a regular jigsaw to make this cut, but a coping saw is slow. And with a regular jigsaw, you have to cut from the top and hold the blade right against the face of the cope, which means the base of the saw bangs against the cope unless you hold the saw away from the molding, and even if you're able to do that, you're still cutting on the face of the molding, so the grain tears out. Unless you use a really fine blade, and then you have to cut really slow. Hey, instead, I use a Collins coping foot. I showed you this earlier because it allows me to cut from the back side of the molding here, which means I can use a coarse blade in my jigsaw and cut quickly without tearing out the grain on the face of the material. If you use a coping foot, be sure to use the right blade. I didn't for the first 5 years and fought with this tool. David Collins, the man who invented the coping foot, caught up with me a while back and read me the riot act for not reading those instructions. This is a Bosch 244D blade. It's the only one that works well in a coping foot. There are about 6 teeth per inch on this blade, so it cuts fast, and the gullets are really deep, which means it clears the waste away quickly. Plus, the teeth are set wide apart. With a wide, clean kerf, you can scroll cut even with this nasty looking blade and follow just about any profile. Let me show you. I hold the tool in 2 basic positions. In both positions, I always have both hands on the tool. Having 2 hands on a power tool is a must. The first position I'm using here is the pull position. The saw blade is pointed toward me so I can pull the blade into the material. The first cut I make is for the sliver or finger that will form the top miter. The angle of the blade makes a good back cut. Next I make a series of relief cuts into this bullnose. One trick you'll learn really fast is always have an exit. You'll notice that all these relief cuts are made straight in. If I angled these cuts or attempted to scroll the saw along the profile, I wouldn't be able to back the blade out. By making relief cuts, I'll be able to follow the profile and remove the blade at any point. Now I'm going to cut carefully around this quirk detail. Before changing the position of my hands, I come back to the top and follow the bullnose, sometimes cutting, sometimes nibbling. Now I'm using the push position, with the blade pointed away from me. I start with the blade at a fairly good back cut angle. If you look quickly, you'll see my left thumb is hooked safely on the back of the foot. I can't keep it there for long because the saw moves under the material, so I move my thumb onto my right hand to help steady the saw and make a clean cut. I make this miter sliver a little thicker so it won't break. So I have to cut a small relief in the butt end of the previous piece. But that's easy to do with a sharp utility knife. I'll show you that in a minute. Oh, if you have trouble cutting this tall plinth area, sometimes it's tough in tall hardwood base, try this trick that Kevin Coyner taught me. After you cut the miter for an inside corner cope, set the saw at a slight bevel in the other direction and cut straight along the miter until you reach the profile. Then cut the cope on this right here the same way I did this one. Now I'm going to cut this piece to the right measurement. Once you cut the cope, you can measure from the long point there and mark the opposite end. This piece is going to fit on that pilaster over there, so I'm only going to make it 4 1/8 inches long. If you want to learn more about coping baseboard with a coping foot, read the article that's included on this DVD. Fastening baseboard might not seem so tough once all the joints are properly cut, but like measuring and cutting, there's more to it than meets the eye. Before sticking the base against the wall, I always look for the studs. Sometimes you can see the nails in the drywall at the bottom of the wall. And if not, I use a magnet like this to locate the studs. Then I make marks on the floor. If the finished flooring is already installed, you can stick a piece of tape on the floor or on the wall. And if the walls are plaster, I use a stud finder, or as a last resort, I'll poke holes right through the wall with a sharp awl or a nail. You know, the baseboard will cover all that damage anyway. Most of the time, I lift the base up off the floor about 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 to 3/8, so any irregularities in the floor won't be transferred or reflected into the baseboard. I cut and carry these spacers, just like these, and place them under the material before shooting into the wall. 3/8 is about as high as I dare raise the base. Any higher, and the bottom edge of the baseboard right here might show after the carpet's installed. Base shoes usually installed on top of vinyl flooring, but be sure that's the plan, or you'll have to lower the baseboard wherever there's going to be vinyl flooring. I don't need spacers on this floor. It's pretty flat. Remember, I cut this piece a little long, but not too long, or it might move the casing on the door. Once I have a couple of pieces in place, I nail into the studs and down into the sill plate. As I said earlier, when I install MDF baseboard, I miter the inside corners. But sometimes mitered corners don't come together perfectly tight, especially if there's a hump or a belly in the wall. So I carry little shims with me, cut from MDF, and shim the top of the base in order to straighten up those corners. I also shim the base if the wall's really long and bowed, or if I'm basing a column that's really out of square. Nothing looks worse than a wiggly piece of baseboard on an out of square corner or a really long wall. I can hold this string tight right on the top edge of the base, and I can see just how much I need to shim it. Right about there. I break off those shims too, and if they're still sticking up a little, I can chop off the top with my chisel, and then I caulk right over the base. Now I'm ready to keep moving toward my left. For these three pieces, I'm going to use my 23 gauge micro pinner to fasten the miters while the pieces are on the pilaster. But first, I'll check that the pieces fit, and then I'll glue up the outside corners. This little micro pinner, I can tack the base right to the pilaster, and I'll still be able to move it and adjust it once I put this piece on. I like to glue up both sides of all the miters because it helps seal the wood too. And that way I'm sure I won't have a glue starved joint in here. If I seal the ends of the wood, it won't get as much movement seasonally as the humidity changes. There we go. I'll tack this miter right now and nail it on both sides. Now I can still move both these pieces because it's only nailed to the pilaster right there. Now I'll get the other corner. This is a pretty nice glue bottle. It has a vacuum chamber right on the front of it. So the glue is forced to go up this vacuum chamber, and when you let off pressure on the glue bottle, it draws the glue right back down the spout, so the spout's never clogged. And that way you can glue vertically with it like you saw me do just there. I'll put this piece in now. Yeah, that's a good fit. I'm concentrating on the miters first, and then I'll nail it off to the pilaster. I'm going to switch guns though and use this 18 gauge brad. I've got 1.5 inch nails in here, so they'll penetrate right through the base into the pilaster, and that's all I need to hold this still. Cutting inside and outside corners is only one part of installing baseboard. There are a lot of other twists and turns too, like this bullnose corner. There are two good methods I know for installing baseboard on bullnose corners. One is what some of us call a 3-piece corner. This corner is made by cutting each piece at a 67.5 degree angle. That's 22.5 on your miter saw. The other way is to make a bullnose corner with a pre-manufactured round corner made from either wood or plastic. I approach installation on both of these corners pretty much the same way. First, I assemble mock-ups like these using fast-acting glue so I can mark the wall while I'm making my cut list. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to use a round bullnose corner on this corner and a 3-piece corner on this one. And you can see how easy this is to do. Once you mark the wall, all you have to do is measure to that mark. But be sure to check the corner first with a protractor. If it's not 90 degrees, you'll have to make an adjustment in the miter angle on each piece of baseboard, even if it's a butt cut, especially if you're pre-assembling the pieces, which I'll get to in a minute. I use true angle protractors. I like the stiff ones, but they only come 18 inches long. I bought several of those. This is one of the thin ones, and I cut them down. I cut them down to about 10 or 12 inches on one leg, and even shorter on the other leg. For when I'm doing base like this, or crown molding, I can reach around a corner like so. Let me turn this around and use my brains. There we go. And I can read the angle of this corner with that short leg. Yeah, it's a little bit off 90. About 1 degree. That's not enough to bother with. Let me check this side. Nope, this one's right on. So I don't have to bother with either of these corners. But you have to know that before you go cut the pieces. Because if the corner's out of square more than 2 degrees, I make a note on my cut list. And then I'm ready to use a saw. For a 3-piece corner with 22.5 miters, I cut all the ends first, like this one. I make them all 67.5 degrees, even if the corner's out of square, because it's easier to knock out all those corners at the same angle and at the same size. They're about 5/8 of an inch for most bullnose corners. I make any corrections for out of square corners when I cut the ends on longer pieces. Sure, the miters might be off, but only a little. If I'm installing a manufactured round corner, then the two cuts on the longer pieces are butt cuts, but remember, they have to be cut out of square by 1 degree as well if the corner's out by 2 degrees. After cutting all the pieces, I like to pre-assemble these corners whenever I can, because manufactured corners are never perfect. They rarely line up exactly, especially on a wall, and getting them to fit right while they're on a crooked wall makes it even tougher. And I hate sanding all these little profiles in here. Even working with a 3-piece corner can be a struggle on a wall because you only have 2 hands. So I pre-assemble all of these pieces using either 2P10 or Franklin's High Performer polyurethane hot glue. Of course, if the pieces are too long to hold, then I assemble them right on the wall. Now it's easy to install all these pieces at one time. I left this joint right here open and didn't pre-assemble it just in case I had to make a minor adjustment in the fit, but I can glue it up now and sand it out right on the wall once I glue this joint. Just like any other minor misfits can be sanded out once the pieces are attached to the wall. If you can't pre-assemble these pieces though, try filling the back of one of these round corners with some adhesive caulking and then fit all the pieces together right on the wall. You might not get as clean a corner, but at least that way you won't have to shoot a nail right through the round corner and risk having the nail deflect off the bullnose and end up in your finger. Today, safety glasses are available in a variety of styles. They're scratch resistant and some are even fog free. The yellow tinted goggles at the center top are fog free and they're available from Dust Be Gone. They're great for 100% protection. See the list of suppliers under articles in this DVD for contact information. The wraparound glasses at the left and the right are available from most home centers, and you can find a distributor through FastCap too. The glasses at the bottom are mine. They're prescription glasses made from high-impact polycarbonate, and they have protective side shields too. I can't hear my daughter's telephone ring anymore, both because the pitch on her phone is the same as the tinnitus ringing in my ears, and because I've lost hearing in both my ears from loud noise. If only I'd worn hearing protection when I started in this business. Without getting into decibels, I'll simply say that when it comes to hearing protection, something is better than nothing. Find the type of hearing protection that you're most comfortable with and wear it always. I like the earplugs with the neck cord on the bottom right. I always know where they are. The expanding foam plugs bottom left offer a little more protection, but I lose them too easily. And I've never been comfortable wearing either of the headsets at the top, though they're often the most effective. Use a dust collector. Dust collectors are important too, especially for table saws, chop saws, and routers. Even on the job site, a shop vac is better than nothing. In a shop, you can collect a lot more dust with a central system. Dust from a miter saw is the most difficult to control, and I'm still experimenting with this contraption. Always wear dust protection. Dust protection is like hearing protection, except instead of being measured in decibels, it's measured in microns. And with the type of material carpenters cut these days, and recent tests suggest that even wood sawdust is carcinogenic, you should always wear a dust mask or a respirator, in addition to providing plenty of ventilation. The respirator on the bottom left offers the most protection. The disposable masks at the bottom right and top left offer only fair protection, though they're more comfortable and readily available from home centers. The surgical type mask at the top right is available from Dust Be Gone. It's comfortable to wear and can be washed repeatedly. Miter saw safety. Never disable a saw guard. Saw guards are made for a purpose, believe me. I've seen the statistics. Too many serious accidents are caused by carpenters removing the guards. Don't remove the guard on your saw. There are safer, easier, and more accurate ways of lining up the blade with the measurement mark. Keep your hand behind the fence. I'm not a safety spokesman for the miter saw industry, and I'm not repeating the instructions I've read that come with the tools. The reason I keep my hand at the back of the fence is so I can control the workpiece and creep the measurement mark slowly up to the blade. But the practice also saves my hand from a common miter saw injury. Remember, your hands and fingers are worth more than any piece of molding. Use clamps. Yes, I use clamps too, whenever the need arises, and that's why I always keep them hanging from my miter saw stand, so I won't hesitate to reach for a clamp whenever I'm about to make a dangerous cut. Remember, if you hear that little voice in the back of your head whispering a warning, stop and listen to it. Wait for the saw to stop before reaching past the blade. I'm a production carpenter and I break this rule far more than I should, but I try not to. Most miter saws are equipped with electric brakes these days, and it only takes a couple of seconds for the blade to stop. Sure, if your blade has a guard, what's the risk? Well, what if that guard hangs up just once? In a recent poll of finished carpenters who work on job sites, 95% of the respondents said they never use a guard on their portable table saw. The reason is that guards frequently interfere with the operation of the saw while cutting dados, rabbets, and thin rips. Because guards are usually difficult to remove and replace, carpenters in the field abandon them. But be warned, nearly all table saw accidents would not occur if guards were in place. I've worked without a guard on my job site table saw for many years. The nature of finish work in the field has left me with little alternative. I've developed techniques that provide some additional protection, but these techniques will not replace the safety of using a saw guard and a splitter on your table saw. Remember, if you remove the guard and splitter from your table saw, you do so at your own risk. I always use a wooden accessory fence attached to the rip fence. I make the accessory fence about an inch taller than the maximum height of the blade. Because the accessory fence is taller than the maximum height of the blade, my hand will hit the fence before coming into contact with the blade. But the fence only helps protect my hand when the fence is close to the blade. Many carpenters develop a habit of using their thumb or finger to push narrow pieces through a table saw. That dangerous habit is prohibited by an accessory wooden fence. Your thumb's just not long enough to reach the stock on the table saw. The accessory fence forces carpenters to use and become dependent on a push stick, one of the most important techniques for working on a table saw. A push stick will not only protect your hand from the blade, but will also give you more control over the workpiece, so your cuts will be straighter and smoother. Don't use a simple push stick with a notch cut in the end. Always use a push stick with a handle that rises above the maximum height of the blade. With a push stick of this design, if something slips, your hand has a much better chance of sailing right over the top of the blade rather than right down into the blade. An article on table saw tips, along with drawings of this push stick, is included on this DVD. You can access those articles, which are PDF files, by opening this DVD using Acrobat Reader. Hold downs and feather boards are another vitally important safety feature for using a table saw. They also provide more control and help produce smoother cuts. Grip-tight hold downs are magnetic. Because the base of my portable saw isn't metallic, I let this grip-tight steel fence into the wooden accessory fence on my table saw. Benchdog also manufactures a fine line of feather boards which can be used as hold downs too. I made an additional accessory fence for the rip fence on my saw just for mounting 2 feather boards. There are a lot of table saw operations that require custom hold downs and guards. Be sure you use your brain and consider all the risks before turning on the saw. If you're not comfortable with making a cut, don't make it. There's always another alternative. Carpenters should take advantage of the full adhesives arsenal available today. New technology in adhesives allows the work to last longer, simplifies construction, and reduces assembly effort and expense. I continue to use Titebond 2 for the majority of interior woodworking projects, second from the right and far right in FastCap's GlueBot, but until recently I relied on polyurethane adhesives for all exterior work. Titebond and Gorilla Glue are on the far left and the center. These polyurethane glues passed arduous Type 1 testing, a nasty cycle of soaking, cooking, and more soaking, ensuring a strong, durable, and waterproof glue. Titebond 3, similar to Titebond 2, is now available and has also passed Type 1 testing, making it an even better choice than polyurethane for exterior applications. Adhesives aren't limited to bottles. New brands and types of caulking compositions are hitting the market every day. Some are extraordinary. PL polyurethane adhesive caulking on the left is ideal for a variety of exterior trim carpentry applications, from installing paneling to wrapping columns. Highly flexible and brilliant white polyurethane adhesive caulking like Rainbuster on the far right is great for waterproofing, with the advantage that it'll adhere reliably to almost any type of construction surface. For interior work, Liquid Nails in the center has revolutionized the installation of coffered ceilings, wainscoting, arched doorways, and endless other tasks that once took days or weeks can now be accomplished in hours. Fast-acting glues have also changed the way we work. Carpenters are still on the trail of the best system. There are advantages and disadvantages to many. This butane-powered hot glue gun is one alternative. A truly cordless tool, a charge of butane lasts most of a day. Industrial glue sticks are available that ensure durable joints. I'm pointing to the starter switch. The red glowing light near the tip means the tool is ready for use. This kit from Adhesive Tech, the CB900K, comes with 4 tips for different applications and an assortment of glue sticks. The glue sticks are stored in the lid of the case. The bottle of butane must be purchased separately, though there is a spot for it in the molded case. There's about a 5-minute waiting time for the gun to heat up, and the glue isn't waterproof, nor does it bond as well as most carpenter's glues. Franklin's High Performer system is another alternative. The glue cartridges in this cordless gun are heated in a corded stand, then the gun is removed for use. The gun remains warm enough for continued use for about 5 minutes. Startup time is about 3 to 5 minutes. A variety of cartridges are available for different applications, though shelf life is limited to about 4 months. Reuse of open cartridges is now more reliable because of improvements Franklin has made in valve design. The gun has also been reinforced and greatly improved. Cartridges cost about $5 each. Cyanacrylic glues have been around for years, and several new ones, valued by carpenters, have recently hit the job site. FastCap's 2P10 is a wonder glue that speeds up every type of assembly. With no warm-up time, this two-part glue is great for all joints. The manufacturer claims it's waterproof and bonds permanently. The glue is especially useful for self-returns, splices, and the delicate pre-assembly of baseboard moldings and crown molding. Reveal blocks are handy tools to carry, especially for carpenters who are just starting out, or for tricky trim installations, where back-to-back jambs and tight mullions require near-perfect reveal lines. Tracing a line on the jamb is the only way to ensure that the casing goes on right the first time. When I make one of these jigs, I make 5 or 6 at a time so I can hand them out to the guys on our crew, or in case I lose mine. The dimensions are pretty simple to follow. I like them about 3 inches square, so you can hold them in the corners of a jamb and trace a line along the side that's just long enough. I use fast-acting glue to stick the knob to the block, then run a screw through the top, just in case. I've seen reveal blocks that have 3/16 shoulder rabbets on 2 sides and 1/4-inch shoulder rabbets on the other 2 sides, for 2 different reveals. But I find that nearly all my reveals are 1/4 of an inch, or just a hair under, so I rabbet the blocks 1/4 of an inch all the way around, which makes it a lot easier to place the block in a corner in any position. And the cheek cuts are all 1/4 of an inch deep. I start by making the knob. I rip the stock about 1 1/4 inches wide and put a 10-degree bevel on both edges. Using a good push stick, one that's long and tall, is a must for this job. Next, I cross-cut the ends of the blocks, also at a 10-degree bevel. This walnut's pretty heavy, so the small pieces weren't drawn into the blade. But for lighter wood, you might want to use a zero-clearance fixture for making these cuts. Rather than flip the saw for the second cut, I just flip the stock. Before routing the rabbets in the bottom of the block, I first attach the knob. That gives me a better place of purchase while I'm cutting the rabbets. But you can't just clamp your hand to a small piece of wood like this and then push it through a router bit. I'm only using my left hand to steady the piece. My fingers are not clamped to the knob. The push stick I made does all the hard and dangerous work. It's notched to hold the knob down while pushing it through the bit. Making a simple push stick like this only takes a couple of minutes. You can do much cleaner work using a push stick, and besides, you don't have to risk losing a finger or 2. A zero-clearance fixture allows you to cut miters and self-returns on small pieces of molding without the danger of small pieces flying out of the blade. I made mine from a piece of 1x6 and a piece of 1x4. To keep fasteners out of the way of the miter cuts in the 90-degree butt cut, add screws later, after the cuts have been made. Assembling one of these fixtures should be fast and easy because they don't have a long lifespan. I use a combination of fast-acting glue and carpenter's glue to secure the table to the fence, a suggestion I picked up from an attendee at a carpentry clinic. I spot glue with 2P10, then spread carpenter's glue throughout most of the joint before spraying activator on the 2P10, and that eliminates the need for clamps. Start each miter cut. Hold the fixture flush with the right-hand end of the miter saw fence, swing the saw to the left, then mark the left-hand miter. Hold the fixture flush to the left-hand end of the miter saw fence, swing the saw to the right, then mark the right-hand miter. Center the fixture and make the butt cut. Draw a deep registration line on the fixture on both ends of the fence to make lining up future butt cuts a lot easier. After making all the cuts, install the fasteners for additional support. If you hate to see clumsy back-cut joints wherever the baseboard or the chair rail is thicker than the casing, then try this 22.5-degree return. Always start by cutting the return cap. That's the little piece that caps the end of the molding. The first cut is a 45-degree outside miter. That's the left side of the cap, the side that hits the casing and the wall. Cut the right side of the cap at a 22.5-degree outside miter. That's the side that will cap the end of the baseboard just before the base hits the casing. Next, cut the end of the baseboard at a 22.5-degree outside miter. Use 2P10 glue to pre-assemble the pieces. Some carpenters prefer the thick glue, others prefer the gel. Just be sure to use enough glue so that the joint isn't starved. Spray activator on the other piece. Some people wait for the activator to flash, others just move right along. The glue seems to cure no matter what. Then hold the two pieces for 10 seconds and the joint will set. Be sure to move your fingers and the piece around a little, or your fingers might stick to the baseboard, and the baseboard might stick to your work table. In 30 seconds, the glue will be completely cured. Place the assembled length up against the casing, then scribe a line on the return. After some practice, you'll be judging the nip by eye, or better yet, while you're at the saw, use a short piece of casing to mark the nip. Cut the nip square in your miter saw. The finished joint is a vast improvement over the typical back cut joint. A nip miter is an improvement over a standard self-return because the baseboard covers more of the wall, creates less of a pronounced outside corner, and seems to grow out of the casing. Just remember, though, there are times when a standard self-return looks great. Even if the casing's wide enough to accept the base cap, a return can enhance the dramatic shadow of any molding. This return from Henry Huntington's museum home in Southern California is only one example. I'm right-handed and try to cope most pieces only on the right-hand end, but some rooms and pieces of baseboard call out for a different approach because of special columns, self-returns, or small pieces that have to be installed first. I can cope left-hand ends too, but it's a little harder. To avoid the drudge of coping left-hand ends, I use a simple carpenter's trick that works well with pieces that would otherwise require a cope cut on both ends. It's a simple matter of angling the butt cut behind the cope on the previous piece. First I cope and install the right-hand end on the left corner. The long point of that cope should just touch the wall, so this is a perfect situation for cutting a fairly thick finger on the long point. A finger cut too thin will snap off. Next, I cut a small miter mortise on the mating piece of molding, then angle that piece in behind the cope cut. When the two pieces slide together, the joint closes up tight, and the top of the cope looks just like a miter. Once the left-hand end is tight, I move over to the right-hand end and slide the cope over the butt cut piece. Notice I've cut a small miter on the butt end to accept the cope finger. The finished cope joint is tighter than a miter and will stay that way.